the beginning of the webinar, I will speak in English. And when our commentators from trade unionists and also from grassroots activists give their comments, I will switch to Bahasa Indonesia, Indonesian language. So I think we can start. I will prepare for this live streaming first, and then yeah, we will officially start the webinar. Untuk kawan-kawan dari Indonesia,
for those of you joining from Indonesia, we will have simultaneous interpretation available for you. To be able to access the interpretation, you can see the interpretation option at the bottom of your screen. You can see that on the bottom of your screen.
Okay. Kita akan mulai. We will start our webinar. So, welcome everyone, brothers and sisters, to a webinar on just transitions in palm oil industry. I'm Rizal, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar. Mulai, this event is held by Transnational Palm Oil Labor Solidarity Network, or in short, TPOLS Network. We are activists, trade unionists, organizers, and scholars who share concerns about unsustainable practice of palm oil industry, where we work together to build collective power and advocating for the rights of the communities and the people who are being suffered by the business practice of the industry. I would like also to thank to Bread for All who support our initiative, and also to our fellow team, to Sawit Watch, to Essen House, and to our fellow scholars for your great effort in making this webinar possible, and also to your contribution in developing the idea of just transition. Our today's webinar will be discussing the idea of just transitions in the palm oil industry, particular with emphasis on workers' perspective, and the ultimate objective is to create a strategic alliance between three main social forces: the labor movement, the environmentalist, and agrarian community, including the local indigenous. So here we have three speakers who will present to you our paper on just transitions, containing some reflections and conceptions. Our first speaker will be Zidan. Zidan is member of Sawit Watch, an Indonesian-based NGO who have been campaigning and are organizing on the land and workers' rights issue. Sawit Watch is also our leading organizations in this project. Zidan later will share with us some introductions to the Just Transitions project and some reflections based on the previous and ongoing discussions with various groups within the network and local groups concerning topics. And then we will have Fitri Arianti. Fitri is Indonesia coordinator of Rainforest Action Network, who have long experience in campaigning the environmental problems in palm oil industry and also building collaborations with workers' movement. And last but not least, we have Michaela. She is scholars from Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology, University of Cologne. Michaela has published many academic work with her current research project exploring how different and partly contradicting visions of the future influence forest use change and related social, economic, environmental transformations in the forest uplands of Indonesian Borneo. Both Fitri and Michaela are also authors of our Just Transitions paper. We will be later share our paper in the chat box. So the presentation sessions will be 20 to 30 minutes and then followed by 10 minutes of comments and feedbacks from each commentators. I would like to greet our commentators coming from 4 backgrounds, from trade union, environmentalists, local indigenous, and also scholars. So we have Eko Sumaryono, leader of FSBMM Union, and also Herwin Nasution from Serbundo Union, both union based in Indonesia. And also we have Yason Ngelia. Yason is a young West Papuan activist who organized local indigenous and workers in palm oil plantations in West Papua. And also we have Isaac Rojas from Friends of Earth Costa Rica, and also Puja Semedi, scholars from Gajah Mada University in Indonesia. Our commentator will hopefully present your experience, your thoughts specific to your background. And lastly, there will be another 40 minutes for open discussions where everyone can speak, give comments, questions, and share some thoughts. Before we start our first sessions, there is a few more informations to guide us. This webinar will be streamed online in TIPOL's YouTube platform. I will share the link later in the chat box, and please share the link to your network or colleagues who are not able to join this webinar. And we also provide simultaneous English to Indonesian language interpretations to also accommodate our fellow Indonesian speakers, commentators, and general participants to join without worrying any language barrier. So please to speak as clear as possible to help our interpreters. There will be some technical things to consider where there will be some switching between languages during the course of the webinar. So participants who need interpretations, you may move to the provided language interpretation channel. You can find the options below on your screen. I will announce whenever there will be the language switch. So now I will invite our first speaker, Zidan, to start our presentations, and then followed by Fitri and Mikaela to continue the sessions. Zidan, the floor is yours.
Halo. Terima kasih.
Hello. Thank you very much, Rizal, our moderator.
Berbicara dalam bahasa Indonesia.
I will be speaking in Indonesian.
Sebelum bahan presentasi, saya akan menyampaikan.
Now, before I share with you the presentation, I would like to explain a little bit about the Just Transition project that we are doing at the moment.
Proyek ini diawali pada tahun 2019 ya.
So the project began in 2019, where TIPOLs began discussions with workers and environmental activists about developing a just transition for the palm oil industry. And this is included in this paper, Just Transition in the Palm Oil Industry, a preliminary perspective. And this is what we will be discussing. This is what we are discussing. And TIPOLs designed a project proposal supported by Bread for All. And the objective is to connect these conceptual ideas with workers' experiences on the ground. And we will develop a further vision for social and ecological transformation in the palm oil industry. So in general, our objective here is for workers develop independent mindset to address the degradation caused by the palm oil industry. Workers or unions adopts just transition as a way towards that social ecological transformation. And at the final stage, we hope to be able to create a broader coalition for a transformation in this industry, in the palm oil industry. This project is done in 3 provinces in Indonesia, East Kalimantan, Central Kalimantan, and South Sumatra. But we plan to scale up in other areas, such as in Malaysia, which has uh, quite vast palm oil plantations. And we will continue to carry out this project until 2025. TPOLS is currently in discussion with workers and unions in these provinces. We are currently preparing the methods and analysis based on the results of discussions with the unions. And this will contribute to the next paper. So in brief, that is the overall that's the overview of just transition, the work that TPOL Southwatch is doing in Indonesia. In addition, now I would like to share with you our presentation. Next slide, please. So this is the situation with the palm oil industry in Indonesia. I hope that the commentators later on can share about the situation in other countries, such as in South and Central America or other countries. In Indonesia, the area is more than 22 million hectares, and the industry has led to many agrarian conflicts. Palm oil in Indonesia employs around 16 to 20 million workers. Studies done by Palm Oil Coalition shows that the majority of these workers are precarious workers, and many are women. So that is the labor context with all the underlying problems. This includes precarious employment, lack of unions, lack of freedom of association, lack of health security, health insurance or social security. And the conversion of primary forest to oil palm in forest areas is estimated to contribute 382 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions. This is based on Greenpeace's study. Several years ago in Indonesia, there were major fires, major land and forest fires. And these fires caused losses of $16.1 billion or around 222 trillion rupiah. Therefore, we can conclude that the palm oil industry is not socially and environmentally sustainable. There has been many conflicts, agrarian conflicts, conflicts with indigenous communities, conflict with workers because of their working conditions. So what is the situation like in Indonesia? Well, we have here environmental groups, labor unions and workers, and environmental NGOs. Now, there are conflicting interests, and in several occasions, in numerous occasions, these have led to conflicts. In Kalimantan, for example, there were conflicts between local communities with concessions with companies. Similarly, there have been conflicts in Jambi in Sumatra Island, conflicts where local communities are demanding or trying to reclaim their land. And in Central Kalimantan, for example, the indigenous communities continue to ask workers, what are they doing there? So there is a quote unquote suspicion of these workers. And there is conflict between several elements here. And many groups suffer because of the presence of palm oil plantations, including workers, local farmers, and indigenous communities. And looking at this through the lens of workers, this is interesting. In Indonesia, we have to look into the issue of workers. We have to take a closer look because workers, some of them are local communities, some are transmigrants who were brought in by the government from one area to the palm oil plantations, and they become workers. We also have migrant workers. We also have generational workers. In Indonesia, there are many different worker identities. There is a diversity. In addition to being workers, in some areas, they are also local communities or indigenous communities. So it's interesting if we look closer and if we look and compare with the problem of landlessness and the vulnerability faced by local communities and migrant workers, they're facing different problems. And it is interesting to look at this so that we can develop transformation or just transition. So now I would like to invite Fitri to continue with the next session. Go ahead, Fitri. Thank you, Zidan. So for my section, I will be explaining about environmental impacts.
So for Indonesian speakers, please
Jadi
make sure your interpretation is on. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on the environmental impacts of palm oil workers directly, because as Zidan touched on earlier, environmental issues sometimes is seen as something separate to palm oil workers, when in fact, in their regular daily lives, they are exposed to many hazardous and dangerous kind of environmental impacts already. So this is not exhaustive, and there's increasing documentation both from civil society and scholars. But some here that I wanted to highlight is, for example, the exposure to pesticides and toxic chemicals. This predominantly impacts women workers who are in upkeep positions. So, there's many complaints of skin irritations, complaints of impacts on reproductive health. That's a huge issue, and many of them don't even have kind of healthcare that will able to kind of get them treatment. Also the unrealistic and dangerous workloads, as you can see in the image, harvesting palm oil is a dangerous job. And so they would have to gather palm oil fruits up to 2 tons daily, and each of these fruits weigh 25 kilograms. So there's a lot of workplace injuries, and especially in the climate in Indonesia, in places like Indonesia on the equatorial belt, it's very harsh on kind of the workers. Also exposure to the haze from forest fires. This has been getting increasing attention, over the years in places like Indonesia and the Amazon. Workers are obviously at high risk because they're the ones that are working in the plantation and sometimes even expected to continue to perform their jobs while being at high risk of getting respiratory illnesses from being exposed to the haze. So all of these problems in their work environment is going to be exacerbated from climate change. So we can expect heat stress and extreme weather conditions. Flooding is already occurring more regularly in some places, and this makes performing a job even harder. We can also anticipate irregular fruit yields because of irregular climate and extreme weather. And for example, when the yields run low, this will create heavier impact on workers because they may have to work longer hours, they may have to travel further distances to be able to get that same quota if this is not considered as part of workplace and climate mitigation and adaptation. Another kind of phenomenon is the migration that's happening into palm oil driven by climate change. So in places like East Nusa Tenggara, which is an island east of Bali, the drought there has been driving people to find jobs in palm oil plantations both in Kalimantan and Malaysia. So again, they are entering this workforce and entering precarious jobs because of overall climate conditions. And ILO estimated that by 2030, it's projected that 80 million full-time jobs globally will be lost because of climate change, and 60% of that will be in the agricultural sector, so including palm oil. And so this is a huge kind of sector that we need to think about when we think about just transition and climate solutions, because otherwise we'll be leaving out kind of a huge population in addressing kind of both social and ecological impacts. So now that we're starting to talk about just transition, just to kind of review, maybe some folks are already familiar about what just transition is. It's a concept that was initiated by the American Trade Union, Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union in the 1970s under the leadership of Tony Mazzocchi. At that time, there was a lot of environmental pressure for factories to close down because of the toxic and pollution that it was contributing to. And so the US government set up a super fund to clean up these sites. And so the workers in the union questioned, okay, if you have a super fund to clean up sites, why can't you have a super fund for workers so they can also transition out of that industry in a way that guarantees wages, that guarantees retraining, and doesn't put the burden of environmental restoration onto workers. So I'm going to now pass it on to Michaela, who's going to talk a little bit more about one of the alternatives to large-scale palm oil monocultures.
Thank you very much, Fitri. So my turn is now to look to the alternative, the vision that we try to offer. So as an alternative to the current status quo, we propose a palm oil future that is based on rights-based mosaic landscapes that are more ecological, sustainable, respect the rights of local communities, and provide space for a diversified, self-reliant smallholder economy in which oil palms are grown alongside other crops. Many indigenous groups and local farmers living in the forested highlands and the uplands of Indonesian archipelago have preserved the forests and practice a sustainable way of life. They are characterized by having a diverse economic portfolio that includes subsistence farming, cash crop production, livestock rearing, agroforestry activities, and the collection of wild forest resources. The result of this diversified economy is a mosaic landscape, as you can see on this picture, consisting of fields, small-scale plantations, forest gardens, secondary growth of different ages, and also patches of primary forest. So we can switch to the next slide. What are the advantages of such a mosaic landscape? Quite obviously, there are ecological advantages as it promotes sustainability. The plant diversity of a mosaic landscape supports biodiversity, and a denser canopy counteracts soil dehydration. In addition, mixed crops and organic farming methods can help to reduce the use of chemicals. Mosaic landscapes can prevent deforestation of large forest areas and allow for cyclical growth patterns. Local indigenous societies benefit from mosaic landscapes as they correspond to their traditional patterns of land and resource use. There would be no expropriation or evictions for the establishment of large-scale plantations. Instead, customary rights could be recognized, and local communities have the opportunity to integrate oil palm into their existing diversified economic portfolio. The mosaic landscape we envision is based on independent smallholdings rather than smallholders tied to plantation schemes. The farmers are thus not dependent on one crop and better able to respond to changes in prices and demand, and additionally, they can grow food for their own consumption, which in turn contributes to food security. Supporters of the classical model are certainly bothered by the fact that palm oil production in such mosaic landscapes might be less profitable than in monocultures. However, in view of the current overproduction crisis in the sector, A strategy that only focuses on higher yields per hectare is quite short-sighted. The Mosaic landscape approach pursues other kinds of values. The diversified economic portfolio provides stable and resilient incomes for independent farmers, avoids creating more landless people, and avoids more poverty. It reduces the future cost of climate change and environmental degradation, supports food security, health, and well-being of the local population. These social and environmental functions can only be measured in monetary terms to a very limited extent, but they are of indispensable value for future generations of Indonesia and the entire global world. So what are the pathways to mosaic landscapes? How do we get there? And while the mosaic landscape aligns well to the demands of indigenous peoples and environmental justice movements, but how will this model absorb workers and provide alternative livelihoods for them? One possibility would be to include workers as recipients in the land redistribution of plantation areas, which transform them into oil palm smallholders, with the possibility of diversifying then their crops in the long term. Another possibility is the downsizing and restructuring of the existing plantation management to a mosaic landscape, transforming the ecological and social impact model that the current monoculture failed to address. Workers would still work for the oil palm company, but manage a diversified landscape of small agroforestry palm oil units. Abandoning the plantation economy altogether and transitioning into a low carbon economy could be a third option. Workers could be trained and employed in community-based conservation and restoration by offering long-term job and social security. Workers who come from forest-dependent communities would already have ecological knowledge to offer for these efforts, and their skills could be used that were previously not valued. These are options. There are probably much more pathways. These ones could exist alongside each other, and new ways, alternatives could be identified in a future dialogue of workers, indigenous peoples, and environmental justice movements. So we go on, and I pass on to my colleagues.
Thank you, Michaela. Yeah, so Michaela just presented some vision for an ecological and social and ecological vision for transitioning away from the large scale monoculture plantation model. But how can these ecological demands be reconciled with workers' interest? That's one of the core questions that we're trying to explore in this paper. And so we've tried to map out kind of how the labor can position themselves in relation to some of these key environmental benchmarks. So I'm just going to go through some of these. So one kind of key demands from the environmental justice movement is to kind of stop expansion of large scale monocultures. And on the labor position, this could mean that, you know, there could be fewer jobs in the future in palm oil, but no job losses for current workers. And given that the quality of jobs in palm oil plantations is already pretty terrible, you know, there could be also a push for improvements in existing jobs now, improvement in wages, improvement in quality of jobs. And so that could be a position that can be discussed with workers. Secondly, for the mosaic landscape as an alternative development model and as opposed to the large scale monoculture. So a mosaic landscape, you know, is much more small scale, but spans kind of like a big area. So it'll be much more labor intensive and require skilled jobs. And this could also absorb workers who have some of these skills already from working in the plantation to support this model and being absorbed that way. And again, as Michaela mentioned, this could also be a pathway for them to transition from wage workers to smallholders. So moving on to the third one, the protection of Indigenous land rights and livelihoods. So if we're thinking about downsizing and transitioning away from the large-scale model, this means we also would like to support the return of land claims from Indigenous communities that were kind of grabbed in the beginning of kind of all plantation models. And in this kind of demand, workers could be employed as high-skilled stewardship jobs, or also in a more radical kind of discussion of this, workers could also be seen as a potential land reform beneficiaries as a post-plantation mosaic landscape. Lastly, on this slide, a transition away from chemical fertilizers to organic fertilizers. Of course, this means it's better for the environment. It's also better for workers who wouldn't be impacted from the chemical exposure. And using organic fertilizers is also labor intensive and requires more skills. And so this could include retraining. Trade unions could also demand for this to be seen as a permanent job and a position in upkeep that didn't have that kind of same security in the palm oil plantation as it stands right now. And a few more to kind of go through. So similarly with the pesticides, herbicides, and these are also chemicals that have been impacting women predominantly. So again, having unions position themselves and labor to position themselves as particularly paying attention for this to be made permanent and having protections and security in the long term in a model where integrated pest management is used as opposed to the herbicides and pesticides that's currently being used right now. And similarly for the processing of waste from palm oil mills, this could be used in a more circular production, as in the waste can be managed so that it can become organic fertilizers. It could be used as energy, and this also is a high skill job. And unions and workers now who are supportive can also demand for on-the-job training to make sure that this could be integrated in some sort of future transition. And overall, the transition away from more and more production that's profit driven to more sustainable production, from labor perspective, this is something that we need more discussion on. It could be that workers see this as counterproductive because it could lead to overproduction and price collapse. And so for workers, smaller scale production that's more labor intensive could actually be pro-worker and give them benefits for security and workers' interest. So this is kind of the last slide, and there's a lot to dig in. And of course, again, this is a preliminary perspective, as Zidan said in the beginning. And the next step from our paper is obviously to have deeper discussions and organizing with workers on the ground to confirm their views, to understand their views and concerns, building alliances across issues. Again, there's this narrative between jobs and environment, and increasing understanding between the two and building bridges will be really key. Approaching environmental problems also to workers, seeing kind of their issues as an environmental issue, and kind of a reframing of how workers can be more engaged in environmental issues is another one. And of course, exploring kind of the shared experience of land displacement as a result of kind of the plantation model in general, as both Indigenous and farmers and workers, these are all groups that have been disenfranchised from the development and are all kind of impacted both ecologically and socially. And so trying to thread that together and bring those conversations together would be really key. And yeah, maybe we'll stop there and open it back up for discussion. So I'll pass it back now to Rizal.
Thank you, Fitri, Michaela, and Zidan. It's been really insightful from what we heard from our speakers, not only addressing the problems and also the contending interest between workers, environmentalists, and local communities, and also the indigenous, but also the visions and how to build the cooperations and mutual interest between the groups that appear or as if having contending interest. There are quite a few things that I can see here. First, the so-called contending interest can actually be bridged to find mutualisms between the social groups. And yeah, as Fitri mentions in the last slide, there is a lot of essential works to do in building solidarity and collective power, including the importance of organizing and educating grassroots workers. The Mosaic landscape is presented as efficient to incorporate workers' rights, the land rights, and also the environmental sustainability. And I think that is really important given, for example, many discourse on land or agrarian reform, for example, it is often only limited placing local communities' interest and as the subject of the agrarian reform, while workers, on the other hand, often limited in demanding on their basic rights at the workplace. I'm quite confident that many of us have already understand or read or watch many things about the impact of palm oil industry, whether it's social problem, workers problem, environmentals, and many others. What we are lacking based on our reflection and also previous discussions is reflections in what makes us becomes fragmented to each other, and also the visions in how to build the alliance between three social forces. Many times, for another example, the environmentalists being criticized for not offering alternative to the corporate agriculture. Workers who are workers sometimes also indirectly impacted with the campaign when the corporations is getting sanctions. But for example, what we seen in the past year, sanctions towards Sam Darby's, toward London Sumatra, Wilmar, and other big corporations, workers at the grassroots also being impacted. For example, their wage being reduced. But yeah, there's no reflections or discussions in how to accommodate between different interests. So now I will proceed to our commentators. I would like to start from our fellow union activists. And for ease of communications, I will now speak in Indonesian language with Eko from FSPMM Union, and also Herwin Nasution from Serbundo Union. So let's wait for a few seconds for interpreters to get ready, and also for international participants to move to English channel. Oke, sekarang saya akan bicara dalam bahasa Indonesia.
Okay, now I will speak in Indonesian. Mas Eko, are you still here with us? Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us. I would like to hear your views. So we've heard about just transition as an alternative to bring in the interests between the interests of workers and land and other movements. So in your opinion, how does the workers' movement views or criticize campaigns that address the destruction caused by palm oil industry? And there has been news of unions and workers that have been mobilized by companies to face communities. They're pitted against communities. So can you share with us your experience? Please feel free to share your opinions and in your experience. Hi, can you hear me? All right, thank you. So FSBMM was established in 2018, and our sector is food and beverage. We are the Food and Beverage Labor Union Federation, FSBMM. We have a cooperation with palm oil workers in West Kalimantan. We met up with workers, palm oil workers in Kuburaya district. So because our sector is food and beverage, a number of the products of our workers, of our union members, sorry, so many of our members, they use palm oil products, for example, for beverage or chocolate and other products. So we learned about the palm oil industry uh, from planting, maintaining the plantations, maintaining the plants to harvest. And this year, we plan to meet with production workers, palm oil production workers in Kalimantan, in West Kalimantan, sorry. We agree with what the previous speakers have said. As members of IUF, we have an international agreement with IUF since 2015, and which is to end land grabbing, to end land grabbing from local communities, whether it's transmigrants. So transmigrants who have their lands, but companies, palm oil companies, use their trickeries to steal the land of the people. We also agreed, agreed to prevent the losses of the rights of smallholders and workers. And the long-term objective is to make palm oil plantation and palm oil production into a sustainable industry. And then what we have decided with IUF International and what we support as FSBMM, we organize and we push for better work conditions in the palm oil sector, both in the plantations and the palm oil production. With colleagues in the palm oil sector, we want to improve the work conditions, such as stop precarious working conditions and to improve the welfare of palm oil workers. With our colleagues in the palm oil sector, we are starting to do trainings, such as occupational health and safety trainings, and we carry out risk assessments, which is on labor inspection in agriculture. In addition, with IUF, and I'm sure with other organizations, I'm sure other organizations do as well, we are pushing for the ban of paraquat. We conduct local campaigns with FSBMM and IUF and with our global partners, our global colleagues. We are pushing for the ban of paraquat. So that's our work. That's all for me. Thank you so much. Back to you, Bang Rizal. Thank you very much, Mr. Eko. There's one important point that I can take from you is about how workers and unions, we have to be well aware of not only environmental issues, but also land issues. You stated that you do not agree with any forms of land grabbing. Workers are aware of that. So this is important. This is critical because in my experience, this because in my experience, um, some people don't view that as a major issue, but you, and also what you're talking is actually linked to climate change, even though it may not be directly addressing that. And you also mentioned about the banning paraquat. That's very, very important. Thank you so much, Mr. Eko. Now I would like to go to Herwin Nasution, or better known as Mas Don. So Mas Don, what are your views from Serbundo, and what are your experience organizing palm oil workers? I think the more specific question would be, what is the challenge? What are the challenges to push and to expand workers' movements? Not only to demand, what we have been demanding all this time, such as better working environments and for pay, but for other demands as well. And Bang Masdon, what do you think about just transition? For example, the mosaic landscape approach. Do you think that is something that can be implemented in Indonesia? Thank you very much. So I've heard about that, about just transition. I've been listening about this concept. Apologies, speaker's voice is breaking up. And this is something that we have to reflect, to bring forward. Unions has not found a concept of just transition that is developed together, discussed together, where workers are involved in the processes and in the discussions. So you mentioned earlier about the Mosaic approach and and other concepts explained by Fitri and colleagues. These are very interesting. The issues that workers and unions face, as you know, as many of you know, includes exploitation of workers, violations of rights. These are long-running issues. But what would be a fair and just solution for them, for palm oil workers? We oftentimes we don't discuss that, and this is an alternative offer that's very interesting. We want to develop this to create a concept that we can work on together. For workers' unions, we are often faced against environmental issues. We are often pitted against local and indigenous communities. That's often arise. These conflicts often arise, but what we don't often see is state or investors' intervention. Investors don't want an alternative approach. They don't want this just transition because they want a large-scale monoculture plantation. And by violating the rights of workers, they continue to profit. That's why they're allowing all these violations to happen. Similarly with the government and businesses. Apologies, speaker's voice is breaking up. So if we look at the uh, policies on palm oil workers, the policies are actually getting worse, and the workers' positions are getting weaker. So we are we have to focus on the impacts of these conflicts, when in reality, workers view smallholders and environmental issues as part of their problems as well. Climate change, extreme weather, these problems has led to poor fruits or abnormal fruits. Abnormal fruits are, apologies, speaker's voice is breaking up.
dipergunakan gitu Indonesia.
Abnormal fruits are fruits that cannot be that are not productive. These are poor fruits. So and they cannot be sold, and that's caused by extreme weather. And the workers are blamed for these abnormal fruits, and they lose their incomes. And then during the dry season, we see fires happening, and fires taking place in plantations. And so we know about these fires. However, workers who are impacted by the fires, they are not provided with protection. Instead, they're forced to work under conditions of haze, fires. Otherwise, they won't get paid. Not to mention the impacts on their families. We have families who have to move away. Their health are impacted, but businesses, investors, and the government are not taking care of these workers. Earlier, we've heard from Zidan about about the diverse identities of workers. There are transmigrant workers, local workers, um, uh, generational workers. RAN has conducted a study and found that there were workers, there are three generations of workers, and they cannot leave their work because they don't have money. They have to deal with poor facilities, low pay. Apologies, speaker's voice is breaking up. So these are problems faced by generations of workers, not to mention other problems. For example, women workers. 65% of workers are women, and the majority are casual daily workers. They don't get adequate pay, social security, um, they don't get medical checkups or medical facilities, and uh, the health of many female workers are impacted. Many of these women workers work for these are maintenance worker, and they're exposed to chemicals such as paraquat. Their health their health is are impacted, but there are no solutions to the problems that they face. So I think it's very interesting the point that was mentioned earlier about using organic fertilizer instead of chemicals. So issues, environmental issues, labor issues, these are actually there are common interests here. The question is, are we just going to discuss this? I believe that government and businesses have no interest in just transition and how it's important to workers, to local communities, and the environment. They want to continue with exploitation because we know that the majority of the income, the we know that palm oil generate a lot of income for the country. So we need to think about how we can develop this concept further, and how can we further develop this? How can we make this a reality? I would like to thank everyone here who are continually thinking and trying to figure out ways how to get us out of this problem.
Dan eksplisit bahwa
Thank you very much, Bang Masdon. So it seems that these conflicting interests are artificial. They're not conflicting interests. An important point that you mentioned earlier is about how we can bring the groups together. An important point from Masdon is it seems that there hasn't been many efforts to explain to workers, grassroots communities that the issues that we see every day, such as exposure to dangerous chemicals and the impacts of all these problems to the workers, such as lower yield, etc., that is an effect of climate change. Now, explaining climate change in a way that's easier to understand, it seems very challenging. Another point that you mentioned, Masdon, is about the likelihood of doing a trial or to expand this model, like the landscape mosaic model. Going back to the presentation earlier, just transition has consequences. Just transition can potentially disrupt current profit-oriented business of the palm oil sector, the large-scale monoculture palm oil sector. That's something that we can further discuss. I think that I hope that some of the participants today can contribute and explain about how well organized workers are in the agriculture sector. Before we continue our discussion, I would like to invite Yason. Yason is an organizer, is a community organizer from West Papua. He also manages a quite progressive website that and he shares information about Papua, that information that we don't often hear from mass media. Hello, Yason, can you hear me? Yes, yes. Hello, Yason. As someone from Papua, and you've witnessed how community land, how farmland lands have been transformed in the past several years, especially with palm oil expansion to eastern Indonesia. And along with all the conflicts, land conflicts, daily casual workers, local communities who are then who has to work as casual daily workers. So what do you, in your opinion, what do we need to consolidate and build up a collective strength? Uh, can you please explain? Hello, everyone. Thank you for your time and thank you for inviting me. So I've mentioned to Rizal that for organizing with workers, we are very new to that. Only in the past uh, only recently in Jayapura. But if we look at in Papua, in remote areas, palm oil companies are already operating even in remote areas. And the younger generations, they're growing up seeing massive palm oil plantations. The awareness that we have to build about the importance of advocacy, that's something that we continue to do. From what I've noticed and what we've heard about this paper, they accommodate all of the issues. The paper that we've heard accommodates all the issues that we face in Papua, such as the issues of impacted indigenous peoples, smallholders, workers, and oftentimes these interests are thought to be conflicting interests, which put the groups at odds with each other, but that's not the case really. And environmental activists, indigenous peoples, and workers, they're dealing with their own issues. Apologies, speaker's voice is breaking up. So you probably already understand that the state policies ignore these issues, these concerns. That's why these issues and conflicts continue to happen. In Papua, there are apologies, speaker's voice is breaking up. Okay. We know that
khusus untuk bagaimana
apologies, speaker's voice is breaking up.
dan dalam
There,
hemat saya itu memang
in my opinion, in my experience, workers' movement is important, and the concept of just transition is important to workers' movements. But we cannot readily adopt it because, as we know, the development of unions in Indonesia is not equal. In Papua, for example, workers' unions, especially palm oil unions, are still lacking advocacy. Their condition is much worse compared to workers in large companies like Freeport. And the development of unions have to go through, they have to start from square one, they have to start from zero. So in the past 2 years, when my colleagues and I, we've held many discussions with unions, we had many ideas about what can be done by the unions in these plantations. But communication has been very difficult. Creating a common understanding on vision is difficult. And we see that there are many conflicting interests, government interest as well, and company interest, which makes it difficult. In addition, there are several districts. We have seen cases where there are companies that are not registered with the government. And these conditions make it harder for us if we want to translate or implement the concept that you proposed earlier. So this just transition concept, if we want to offer this as a solution, as a movement, this movement cannot be only limited to like the heads of unions, but we really have to reach the grassroots level, everybody on the ground. But this will definitely take time. In addition, in the past 2 years, or in the past 2 or 3 years, the government had a agrarian reform program. In some parts of Indonesia, this program is well accepted. But for Papua, this land object for agrarian reform is still a challenge. For example, if we have someone from the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, they come to share the concept of or to develop a social forestry scheme here, that actually ends up restricting spaces of indigenous people. And this creates further problems for the people on the ground. And the groups become more and more separated. Many indigenous peoples complain to workers about what the companies are doing.
Bisa saya sampaikan teman-teman pertimbangkan juga bisa
In addition,
transisi yang adil sebagai suatu
for
ide
just transition,
normatif sekali, tetapi misalnya
I think that this is a normative idea, but
negara yang sudah dalam
state interest,
mendorong omnibus law,
for example, the state has been pushing for omnibus law or the job creation law in the past year.
pemerintah yang mereka keluarkan dalam
The government
realisasikan program misalnya Tora maupun program
in their social forestry or agrarian reform
omnibus law misalnya
programs, there are passages taken from the omnibus law. So it seems that omnibus law has a huge impact, but I feel that that omnibus law is still left out in this paper.
memainkan peran untuk
I feel that there are forces at play, the oligarchy, they're still making it very difficult for us, and they are contributing and worsening the conditions faced by indigenous peoples, local communities, and workers. So that is all for me. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih, Bung Yason, ceritanya sangat berharga.
Thank you very much, Yason. A critical point from you, a very important point that you mentioned from regions such as Papua,
sedang mengalami perubahan
area facing landscape transformation from traditional farmland
dengan hadirnya
or subsistence farming.
soal
All that is being transformed because of the presence of monoculture plantation.
Mas Don.
Mas Don earlier also said that there are many arguments. So is the problem the palm oil commodity or the monoculture production? Monoculture is what we are trying to transform in just transition in the Mosaic landscape. We have to take into consideration the specific challenges faced by areas of palm oil expansions. There are many conflicts happening, such as Sumatra, Kalimantan. Even in Sumatra and Kalimantan, there are still a lot of land conflicts. But I think the point here is the changing lives of the communities. The process of understanding the wage work in several areas. This is quite a challenge. This has been quite a challenge in creating unions. The concept of unions is a new organization, one that is relevant in areas that are changing the production, the way of the production. One point that we heard from you is that in Papua, Papua is actually the most relevant area to discuss just transition, because the identity, the experience of workers there's a lot of overlaps, and workers are still closely linked to the land that has been transformed, that is now under the control of large corporates. So that is what we've heard from our commentators and presenters. What we can, one of the things that we've heard again and again from our speakers is the importance of organizing. Thank you very much. Now we will go to Pujo and Isaac. And now I will speak in English. So again, for Indonesian speakers, if you need interpretation, we ask you to go to the Indonesian channel. Okay.
Okay, so Brother Isaac, I'm pretty sure you have plenty insights to share, especially reflections of your years of doing campaign, advocacy, and mobilizations to protect our planet, and also the interest of local communities. And also, Latin America is known with being the reference for other countries with the long history of peasant movement there. So what do you think that is necessary to move forward, or some learning experience that you can share based on your experience? So Brother Isaac, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks a lot for the opportunity. I'm really sorry that I don't speak Bahasa, and also that my English is not perfect. So I'm doing my best, and apologize if I have some mistakes. Yeah. So I will talk a little bit about the concept of just transition and our way to approach it. It's Friends of the Earth International. After that, I will focus more on the analysis that you present today, focusing there on some really positive aspects, and at the end on some issues that we think it's important to deal with it. Yeah. Before that, well, I am Isaac Rojas. I'm from Costa Rica, and here I'm representing Friends of the Earth International. Like Friends of the Earth International, we are working on just transition. Working means more discussing what is just transition, and we're doing it with unions, especially in the energy sector. Yeah, because this concept, it comes from the union sectors, and we are looking to build strategic alliance with the unions at the global level, also at the regional level, and at the national level. Because for us, the environment is not only about trees or animals or pollution, but it's about the causes that provoke these pollutions, that allows a way of produce things, and it's about power relations. Yeah, so we need to address those causes. The environment is also a political discussions that cannot be divided from labor rights or women's rights or indigenous peoples and local communities rights, ways to produce, etc., etc. Yeah. The just transition concept for us is linked to where we want to go. Yeah. And for Friends of the Earth International, to address all these causes that provoke the crisis that we are living on climate, on biodiversity, etc., etc., shows that we need a system change that is not dominated by the capitalist system that is the main driver of all these crises. So when we talk about just transition, we are talking about the direction where we want to go. Yeah. It's like a pathway to arrive to a world with more justice, more equity, yeah, with respect and implementations of rights, etc., etc. And this concept also it's a new one. So we can build it and the way to build it is together. Yeah, so we need to give the content to this new concept, because right now, like I think some of you said, it's being co-opted by corporations, by the governments, and by those social actors that want to continue in the way that we are living together to look for more profit. So we need the involvement of local communities, indigenous people, peasants, the feminist movements, workers, etc., to give content to this new concept. And in this way, we're going to avoid the co-optations that we know it's always happening with the concept that we build. Yeah. So like this, we are highlighting the key role that alliance building plays on this kind of discussions. Yeah, that is also highlighted in the document. We cannot change the system alone. We need to build the transition in the place where we want to arrive together. If not, we're going to walk alone, and this is not the way to do it. Yeah, because we cannot know everything. Yeah, maybe we can know about work conditions on the oil palm sector, but it's not the same thing that unions are facing in their daily life. So we need this kind of dialogues in order to build together not only concepts, but also ways of working that lead us, yeah, to have better conditions of life, to attack the causes that provoke all the crises that we are facing. I think also that the document, the analysis, it's a good one and have very interesting ideas that maybe in the future can be deepened further. But for example, on the document, it's important the recognition that it's important to identify and make visible what the problem, what the real problem is. Yeah, and somewhere in the document, it said that the problem is the exploitation of nature and workers by corporation. And this problem must unite ourselves. Because like also the analysis show, there's a lot of false problems that are there and divide ourselves. And some of those false problems are put it in the discussion by the corporation or the government who defends their interests. So this is key to advance. The Mosaic landscape proposal also is interesting. It has positive aspects and important benefits related to the environment, also in relation to rights, and shows an effort in order to have decent and better jobs. Yeah. So in this way, it's really important. Also, the analysis recognize different ways to produce, away from monoculture. Also, it talks about indigenous peoples, and we will add local communities' rights. So it's only to recognize those rights, but also to respect those rights. It recognizes also that the problem that we face on the palm oil sector is not a simple one. And from all the previous speakers, it shows that it is a very complex problem. And finally, it's important that the analysis recognize that certification is not a solution, yeah, because at the end, the certification don't change anything. And in most of the cases, it's only about greenwash. So, and like this, we want to say also that we need to recognize not only the certification like a false solution, but also there's a lot of other false solutions that can be on some discussions, like for example, offsetting or this kind of solutions that the government and corporations are offering, yeah? And it gives the impression that everything will change, but at the end it will change to continue in the same direction, and at the end nothing it will change, yeah? And there's some other issues or themes that it will be good to begin or to continue talking about it in this dialogue in the near future. For example, for what, how, under what conditions, and if the production related to palm oil is necessary. For what we want the oil palm. For example, we wanted to have more industrialized food, or we want that instead of this kind of food, we support and strengthen agroecological system in the hands of indigenous peoples and local communities. Yeah, we need to ask ourselves for what is this production there, because like this we can analyze the current free trade model that promotes production and trade at all costs. Yeah. Related to this discussion, it's important also to discuss the regulation of the palm sector through public policies that can lead us in the future to strengthen other ways of production, like agroecological systems or community forest management, or indigenous and local communities conserved areas, yeah, these kind of things. And this regulation need to happen, by binding public policies, not voluntary systems like certification, like we said a few minutes ago. We need to talk also about public funding to the palm sector, and ask ourselves why the government invests public money in a direct way or by subsidies to this sector, if we know that this sector is not contributing and it will not contribute to improve the quality of life of anyone. It's clear that there's a lot of really bad impacts, negative impacts on the environment, on the labor rights or indigenous peoples and local communities' rights. So we need to also talk about the public funding to this sector in the cases where it exists. In relation to the mosaic landscapes, that is interesting because it shows other ways of production, and it's related, and those ways of productions are related to traditional ways of production like agroecology, for example. But we need to ask at the end, who will control the price, who will control the system? It will be in the hands of corporations or governments who benefit corporations. How we can change it? Because if we change the way of production, we are not going to attack some causes that we need to attack. And it's who is, at the end, control the system, yeah, the trade, prices, etc., etc. Like this, we said that at the end is not only about ending the environmental damages, but also it's about justice, it's about equity, it's about power relation that we need to change. Another issue that we need to discuss is the role of corporations. They will have a place in a new system, or when we talk about system change, they will be there. They are sustainable or not. From our view, they don't contribute to sustainability or to improve the quality of life of anyone, and they don't have a place on this discussion, but is our position. But it's important to discuss the role of corporations, not only on this sector, but also where we want to go. Yeah. Related to corporations, we need to discuss the human rights, labor, and indigenous people's rights violations, also the environmental violations committed by corporations, and the need that they must be held accountable through legal system and public policies with binding sanctions. Also, we need to discuss that it's important to repair the environmental damage caused by the corporations, and who can repair this damage. We don't think that the corporations are going to do it, and there's interesting and important ways that exist right now, and that local communities and indigenous peoples have the traditional knowledge to do it. So they are an important actor on these issues. The issue of indigenous peoples and local communities' rights for us is central, and implies not only land rights, but also autonomy and self-determination. So they can choose if they want to produce or not in a small scale oil palm, and for what, and we need to respect their decision in any case. We think also that on this discussion, and especially because some of our compañeros from the unions said about that women are casual workers and they are dominant. And I think that in the paper, there's not a lot of analysis from a feminist perspective, that the feminist movement needs to be on this talk. Our experience show that it's really important, and like the World March of Women said, the just transition to be just and to be a transition need to be feminist. And our experience shows that the dialogue, the discussion with the feminist movement needs to happen, especially on these cases. And
Isaac, sorry, can you shorten your comments?
Yeah. No, I'm finishing saying that, yeah, well, to highlight that the issue of human rights violations also need to be on the table. For example, The oil palm sector in Latin America is linked to human rights violations, killings, kidnappings, and also there are some big NGOs plays a role there certifying the palm oil industry. So they also have to be accountable on these cases. Like this, I'm finishing. Thanks a lot for the time and to allow me to share some general thoughts.
Thank you, Isaac. Actually, I'm really glad that you mentioned the problem of certification scheme and how we cannot rely on that scheme like RSPO, or in more country-based, there is ISPO and also MSPO in Malaysia. And also, I think Isaac also provide us important points about how to placing capitalism as the framework of analysis, and in order to understand the power imbalance and how it is necessary to build the movement, referring to how the workers can be self-mobilized by their organizations. That requires effort to educate and also to organize the workers. So for the last commentators, I saved Pujo as the last. Pujo is our scholars that hopefully can provide more analytical informations. Mas Pujo, are you still here?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, so yeah, based on many research, many publications, writings, reports, what do you think that we are still lacking in order to change the unsustainable practice of industry?
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll give my comment in English because I prepared it in English, so I don't have time to transfer it to Bahasa Indonesia right away. So first, of course, is a congratulations to Oliver, Fitri, Rizal, Janina, Idme, Kaela for the works, and thanks for the invitation to discuss the issues of just transition in palm oil industry. Yeah, I think I can contribute some comments that hopefully constructive to this project. I agree with all of you that palm oil industry is based on the plunder of nature, so large-scale monoculture plantation that destroy biodiversity and depend on the widespread use of herbicide, pesticide, and chemical fertilizer. And I fully agree also that something need to be done on Indonesian palm oil sector. It contributes a lot to Indonesian economy, but it also creates a lot of problems in Indonesian rural areas. And in regard to your book, to your research, let's see to what extent just transition perspective could be developed in the practice through the collaboration between the labor, indigenous people, and environmental justice movement proposed in this book could possibly work. To what extent it is in this idea of just transition could be possibly work in Indonesian context. There are at least I noticed two paradoxes and that could be in that I have identified. I agree with the alternative you have proposed in this work to develop trained workers properly paid and with long-term investment in the landscape, who don't produce palm oil in alienation from nature, but in accordance with its laws and needs. Okay, the first point is who are the workers? Are the local people or migrant workers from the other islands in Indonesian context? This can be a source of trouble later on. Workers, laborers, you have mentioned in your presentation, are not things. They are human with history and social backgrounds. And their history and social background matter a lot. Locals or migrants, male or female. It can be source of tension among the farmers, among the people. Plantation is notoriously favor migrant workers over local farmers who have lost and sacrificed their farmlands on the plantation. This is the core of the problem in Indonesian palm oil plantation. They took a lot of lands from local farmers, but when they create job, the job is mostly given to people from somewhere else because of certain reason. I'll come to that point later. The idea to hire local people sound good and rational and just, yeah, from our perspective. Yeah. This would make sense, especially because local workers are rooted in the community. But hiring local farmers could be against the plantation company interests because they prefer to have subdued and docile workers, not troublemaker ones. From my observation, from my interview with plantation managers, they don't like local workers because local workers have roots in their society and root in the community. The history of guerrilla since the Roman Empire teach us is the main energy for resistance. So it is there is a little hope that the company, plantation company, willing to hire local people. And even when they hire local people, they mostly hire, women. You're right that 65 of workers, and that is casual workers in plantation palm oil plantation in Indonesia are women. Why women? Because they are more more easily to subdue. Not the men. And there are conditions that are very cruel to make local villagers, farmers, to become subdued and docile workers. If the plantation want to make the local people becoming workers, good workers from their perspective, the local farmers must be made into real proletariat first, so that they have no other choice to earn livelihood but to become plantation laborers. Can we accept morally this condition? I don't think so. It is against our constitution. It is against our moral to turn farmers who own who used to own lands becoming proletariat and then turn them into laborer. In your presentation, you also shown that you have seen some examples of palm oil workers union who stand together with the corporation to sustain oil palm plantation expansion without a problem. Okay, I wonder whether a union like this is not just a tool formed by the company to serve the interest of the company, not real labor union like Bang Nasution just told us. Companies in Indonesia are very good to make their interest like the interest of everyone. We have to be careful with this skill because they have a lot of money. They can hire smart people. They can hire people who speak who sound in the beginning against their interest, and later on with and then later on make them as a pro company man, or in the Indonesian language is orang perusahaan, company people. And considering this factor, the idea of to form group discussion among workers or for workers to discuss issues related to the environment is too idealistic. Good idea. I don't think a palm oil plantation company in Indonesia will be happy with workers who have opportunity, who have space to discuss environmental issues. Because if the workers sit together among themselves and discuss environmental issues, in the second round of the discussion, they will talk about injustice that has been done to them. And I don't think this palm oil company willing to accept this situation. I'll be quick. So in closing, I really appreciate this study. Yeah, it is a hard work to find an alternative solution to the problems faced by the Indonesian people, by Indonesian palm oil sector. But I've been trained to be skeptic. There is one big hidden question that has not been addressed at all in this research. This big question is, does oil palm cultivation have to be handled by a plantation corporation, whose presence always occupies farmers' land and marginalize farmers into the status of becoming host in own or a village, menjadi hantu di kampung sendiri? Is it not better for palm oil to be cultivated by the farmers themselves and the big corporation handling the oil processing industry? There is no technical reason whatsoever that cultivation of oil palm or other global market crops could not be carried out by smallholders. In fact, small farmers can be more efficient in cultivating their lands because they did not steal and they did not corrupt their own farms, different to plantation companies, which is full of stealing and corruption. Cultivation by small farmers also save us from the problem of land grabbing that drive people out of from their own land, which raises the problem of landlessness in the rural areas, in the region where land is supposed to be abundant, and a process that hurt and injure the local farmers who find that their basic right to life is being taken away from them. The ideal of agricultural mosaic landscape can be achieved faster and cheaper costs if we develop small scale palm oil cultivation rather than by large plantation corporation. Smallholders do not like monocrops because they know very well it costs them a lot and it is very risky. So in the practice is they usually all mix the main crop with other crops, following a common sense of having an umbrella before it rains, dia payung sebelum hujan. And lastly, from the study in Lower Kapuas, West Kalimantan, we found out that smallholders treat and pay their labor better, much better than plantation companies. So expansion of smallholding palm oil will not erase the opportunity to become workers in a palm oil sector. On the contrary, workers who work in the farmers in the smallholders palm oil fields earn much better than the wage they earn from the big plantation companies. And okay, the ideals and effort in this study are good, but I hope this study is really true to its name, preliminary perspective, which I take it as a promise that it will be continued further to deal with the most basic issues in the palm oil sector, one of which I've just presented. Thank you. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Mas Pujo. There's one important points in understanding why the company tend to employ trans-migrants or migrant workers or workers from outside where the plantations is located. That thing has been becoming a common knowledge, but I think that is also never been really centered as the point of view in finding the strategy in organizing and mobilizing workers and the local community. That is also exactly our concerns. Why in part of the presentations is addressing workers have different layer, have different backgrounds, and also have specific consequence or choice of strategy in organizing. So we are a bit running out of time, but we can still have some more time for open discussions, about 30 minutes or so. So we are now moving towards the open discussions. If anyone who wishes to speak directly, you can raise your hand, and just for some considerations, yeah, just for some considerations, please give hints what language you will be speaking, so we can have our interpreters get ready. So we have one hand raised. I think Erpan will be speak in bahasa Indonesian language. So for international participants, you can move to English channel. Bung Erpan, dipersilahkan.
Terima kasih, Mas.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to continue the point as shared by Pujo. So, okay, my name is Erpan from Lingkar, Borneo, from West Kalimantan. So if we look at the statistics of palm oil production, the role of independent smallholders producing palm oil in the 1980s, their role is greater than that of companies. So the latest development, it shows that capitalism in palm oil plantations has developed much further compared to the 80s. And this is a major issue related to production statistics. If we compare that of the state, smallholders, and companies, the governments is weakening if we look at the macro scale. So if we look at, if we're talking about just transition, this is a question for all of us. The current situation, I'm going back to the comment from Erwin. There are no requirements to arrive at a better condition for palm oil plantations, because we know what the state is like. We know what the plantations are like. So what I mean is we need to have a broad awareness or education for palm oil workers. The education provided to palm oil workers is very lacking. So there's very little education given to palm oil workers on the environment. The education that we provide, for example, in Lingkar, Borneo, we provide education and information on the normative rights, the rights of the workers, palm oil workers. But what you're saying now is very important. But we need to add to that education and information that we share with palm oil workers. We have to add to that. With this additional curriculum, we hope that they'll have a greater understanding that just transition includes the environmental perspective as well. And like what we've heard from Fitri, we've heard about the organic fertilizers, etc. So we have to include that. So I think that's all for me. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Erpan. Supian, go ahead. You're next. Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Supian Nur from the Workers' Union for Sinarmas in the Federation for Workers from Sinarmas in South Kalimantan. I am a mill worker. And so we are independent unions. And we understand the importance of unionizing to fight against the situation that we face. We see that regulations for protecting the rights of workers are weak. In South Kalimantan, we have an alliance called Serbu Saka, and at the national level, we are part of the KBS, the Palm Oil Workers Coalition, with Zidan. So we want to push for regulation protecting palm oil workers. In South Kalimantan, we've been assisted by NGOs, TURC. They've been assisting us, providing us knowledge about how to organize, how to create the union, how to address these issues. And palm oil workers, we are isolated. We are far from major towns and cities. And the situation is totally different to manufacturer workers who live in cities, but instead we live far away in remote areas. And the majority of the workers, they are of low education. I mean, that's just some of the issues that we deal with. The problems that we face are complex, not just employers trying to make profits from workers, from palm oil workers. Recently, there was an issue about the rising prices of cooking oil. And that was quite a hot topic in the country, but the workers' side was never discussed. So the national issue was the rising cost of cooking oil, of palm oil, but the workers' conditions were not addressed. Are the workers well off? Are they protected? Indonesian regulation, so there's no regulation in Indonesia for palm oil workers protection. In the Palm Oil Workers Coalition, we are pushing for that regulation. So these are some of the things that we are facing in South Kalimantan. Thank you very much and good evening. Thank you very much, Supian. There's a lot that we need to address, that we need to do to organize. And for your information, the agriculture industry, including palm oil workers. So palm oil workers they're one of the sectors that are least organized compared to manufacturing sector. And one of the challenges is the geographical location, where palm oil workers live in remote areas inside plantations, as we've heard earlier. And it's very difficult for them to hold discussions or gatherings in their work areas. So we have one more raised hand from Kai Pung. Go ahead, feel free to speak in English. For those of you who need interpretation, please go to the appropriate channel. The floor is yours, Kai.
Thank you. Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Thank you for all the input that you've provided so far today. I like to agree with most of you, basically, that there is an idea or like a need to have something like a system change. But first, let me state again, I really like about the paper the white-spaced approach that you've taken, because I consider it as kind of helpful to combine and connect these different perspectives, perspective on land, perspectives from an environmental concern or labor concerns. that's what I really like about the paper. I was often curious and wondering myself why such a good idea couldn't be implemented so far in the past, and thus I was thinking again about like systemic issues, why such a more or less obvious idea hasn't been implemented well yet. So I try to keep it brief. The critique that we've heard on the responsibility of companies, I think it's yeah, legitimate. Like obviously, companies bear their share of responsibility. But then again, I also feel that the business approach that they are taking is often supported also on the national level. Let's say like this, when there are permits and concessions given to companies, they kind of keep the profits and the benefits from the land, from the resources to themselves. So I think it would be very nice to consider like to have something, or to reframe or think about something like a basic right to the benefits from these resources, just in the same way like companies have the permit or concession to use the land, yeah, because if there was something like this basic right for workers, environmentalists, for everybody, then this would also strengthen the power to negotiate and the power to reorganize themselves, or like ourselves. I think this would be very, very helpful to, overall speaking, better connect the individual with society, and then society to the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. So what I can...
I think you're still muted.
Is it? Okay. Based on Kai's comments and also previous discussions, I think what is also worth to discuss and to document is some concrete experience in the past, or probably ongoing initiative that looks similar to the ideas of mosaic landscape. For example, one good story is in southern Thailand. There's one peasant union called Southern Peasant Federations of Thailand, where they successfully reclaimed the land previously owned by palm oil corporations, and now the land is changed alongside with the social relations in managing the land, where there is a portions of land specific for women, so they have more independent positions because the unions also aware of the gender imbalance. In Indonesia, I also believe plenty stories, similar stories in other countries, including in Latin America, about the movement by the peasant in changing the land. But the question is how to broaden the subject itself, like from our based on existing discourse or discussions, many times the stakeholders, the subject, or the agents tends to be isolated and seen as static category. For example, peasant has no relations with workers, where in other comments we learn from speakers and commentators, there are many overlap between the categories. So I think it is also worth to see more on the concrete experience in the past. Probably some other participants can also share if you have some stories about this. Since there's no hand being raised in the participants list, I would like to invite our speakers, Fitri and Michaela, to respond anything you think is relevant or worth to respond based on commentators' comments, feedbacks, and also from the participants. Fitri or Michaela?
Yeah, I can begin, unless Michaela, you want to go first. Yeah, thanks so much for the commentators, for the rich feedback and things to further think about and develop as we do this, as we kind of develop the Just Transition project. I agree with a lot of the things that said. I especially appreciate kind of the support from the two unions, Mas Don and Mas Eko. I think it's very hopeful to see from the union to hear that they're willing to kind of engage with this kind of discussion. And I think it's really progressive. I think one of the main challenges with working with workers or just with unions in the past is, they are so challenged and isolated in terms of the industry that they are often oriented to normative rights, thinking about wages, thinking about just getting their jobs and securing their jobs, having contracts in place that are more fair. So thinking ahead about the future, what's an alternative to the job that they have is very challenging. So I really appreciate that, from the two unions, that there's openness to discuss this. And I think we should continue to kind of have discussions. And I think too, also, I wanted to say that there's a lot of obviously assumptions because this is a preliminary paper. And I think Mas Pujo's skepticism, I think it's also, fair going in. We can't test any of these positions or assumptions about how labor and union will respond until we engage with workers directly. And I think I agree with Rizal, looking towards some success stories and some attempts in the past for lessons learned will be really crucial. I particularly remember an experience with Mas Don, actually a story that he shared in North Sumatra, where workers actually supported the land the land claim or the land occupation movement in one of the plantations, and they succeeded. And after they succeeded, they ended up selling back the land, so there's a lot of complications in the implementation when we think about regaining control from corporations to the people. What does that look like, and how do we manage it? How do we create agreements among each other, among movements, so that that could be controlled in a way that's going to be sustainable in the long haul? And I also agree that it's not just, how do we ensure social and ecological justice, but also economic justice, because I think that's the core of Just Transition. When we think about workers who are already, just thinking about how to put food on the table, how can they be thinking about this in a way that that supports their interests, but also make sure that they're not continuing to be isolated and alienated in any future and alternative development. So I think that's really critical. Yeah, I think I'll keep it short there because I see a hand and I would really appreciate more comments from other folks. But yeah, looking forward to kind of engaging further with all of you on this.
Thank you, Fitri. Michaela, do you have something to add?
Actually, I have many ideas to add, but also seeing the hand, I want to keep it short.
Sure.
So I just want to want to make 2 points. The first is thanks for this wonderful input from all of you. And it's great that we can take this on board. This project is at the very beginning. So there is a good time to strive and to learn from all this feedback. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to keep in touch with you and have you engaged and work together on developing this vision. The second point I want to stress is that I personally, and I think we as a group, see this as a vision. And if I think of the village that I work in Indonesia, there is very present the Indonesian national idea of that big is beautiful. that there has to be growth, that things have to be big to be modern. You have these big monocultures, and what is small is considered as not being very great. This is kind of backward. This is not what's wished for the future. But I think actually the other way around is right. The small is very beautiful. Like Pujo said, it's smallholders that can be the base for a big transformation. And as continuous drops can shape stone, I don't think that this vision will be realized tomorrow, but I think it's important to start to have a common vision, to have something positive, not something only to work against, to say we critique palm oil is bad, the industry is bad, this is not good, this is bad. We need a vision of something positive, some light at the end of the tunnel that gives us motivation to work together. And of course, the palm oil industry is linked to political power. These are strong structures that have been built over decades. And but still, I think it's important to develop different alternative narratives to inspire people and to unite people. So that's just a short comment from my side. And I pass then on to Herwin Nasution, right?
Yeah. Before we move up to Herwin, just to inform, because Herwin will speak in Indonesian language, so please to move to English channel to get interpretations. Mas Don, dipersilahkan.
Go ahead, Mas Don, the floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to emphasize well, first of all, I agree with what everyone has said. I hope to be able to continue these discussions in the future, so that what we have, so that we can have more colleagues here. We can engage more workers, palm oil workers as stakeholders. I think that's all from me, because I think we're coming to an end in the discussion. No worries. We have about 11 more minutes before we end the discussion. Any comments? Any other comments? Because I don't see any hands raised, I would like to invite Zidan to share his response. So I would like to share a question then. In this ongoing Just Transition project and the initiative to have these discussions, what are some of the things that you're planning? Can you share with us some plans or targets? Thank you, Rizal. So I think just briefly, we plan to have discussions with workers in a number of, in several sites. So in addition to better understanding the situation faced by workers there, we also would like to understand their level of vulnerability. So I think this responds to what Pujo said earlier about landscape monitoring. Who's going to be working there, and who are the workers? Are they local? Who are the workers? Are they migrant workers? Are they local communities? This is important for us to address, and we can better address this once we do a field visit, a site visit, because palm oil plantations are, in general, they are similar, but there are certain situations. For example, with new plantations, the majority of workers are locals. Like in South Sumatra, for example. But in Kalimantan, the majority of workers are local migrants. This is some of the things that we need to look into, that we'll have to look into on site. In addition, we'll be listening from workers. We'll be hearing from workers, especially women workers, to understand their perspectives, the issues that they're facing, and their ideas about how to do this palm oil transformation. So that's the plan in brief. Thank you. Thank you, Zidan. I would like to give some time to the writers, to the writer of this Just Transition paper. So we have Oliver. In addition to Oliver, we have other writers who are not here. So Oliver, would you like to share a few words here?
Thanks, Rizal. I mean, I think everything has been said, and I'm very happy that we had such great comments and commentators, and that everyone was really thinking about it. And this is just the start of the project and of the process. Maybe just to stress that the sort of interesting thing from my perspective about the project is that we're shifting the focus away from consumption back to production. So how to change exactly how palm oil is produced, and not just looking at who is consuming it, and that also that we're looking at the workers as an active force. So we think that workers, if they get organized, can play an active role in the necessary social ecological transformation of the palm oil industry. Of course, this is a big project and a big idea, but I think Indonesia has very interesting history on this. Of course, not all good, terrible things happen as well, but I think this project is connected to the idea of organizing workers. But while we're beginning to organize workers, or our friends in the trade union movement are beginning to organize plantation workers, palm oil workers, already to have this big idea of how workers can contribute to, with a vision for how palm oil production could be, how it could be socially just and ecologically just. And I think that's the exciting thing. And yeah, I think we're going to start. I think the project really starts by going to the workers and listening to the workers, having discussions with the workers. What do they think about it? And this is going to be really interesting. I think when we manage to do that in the first step, what ideas they will come up with, and I think this will be the next topic of the next interesting event organized by TPOS on this topic. Thanks.
Thank you, Oliver. Anyone who wishes to speak or give comments?
Yes, just a little bit to continue, Oliver. Yes, I think the idea is good, Oliver, to see how the workers in palm oil sector organize themselves, and good to talk to them. But we also need to meet and talk with the smallholders, yeah, because they are also active players in this industry. Terima kasih, Danke.
Yeah, that's good point, Mas Pujo. Just to add a little information to Zidan as well and Oliver. At one point, we also plan or design the projects to have like an exchange, as simple as exchange between local communities who many of them also are the smallholders. Exchange to facilitate sharing experience, sharing their live conditions. One important learning points in the past when we organized several discussions is that the company is also intentionally to make separations between workers and the communities, or even among the workers themselves who have different backgrounds, different layer, and also different identity. So in that way, we are aware of how the workers and the grassroots communities are heavily fragmented and alienated to each other and being isolated. So that is why at some points we designed these projects to have an exchange at the local level. Hopefully that will bridge some kind of solidarity feeling, which actually has been there without we put it in a project like this. So yeah, I think that's really good point from Pujo. So we are now near the end of the webinar. Before we close this webinar with some closing remarks from our speakers, I will, for the last time, invite anyone who interested in speak or anything to give comments. So it seems like no one will talk. So I will now give the opportunity to give closing remarks from Zidane, Fitri, and Michaela to end our webinar. So please.
Mulai Fitri dulu.
Fitri,
Fitri, you go first.
Sure, I'll keep it short. I just wanted to thank everyone for participating today and coming to this webinar. I know in Indonesia it's very late now, it's past 10, especially in Papua, so thank you. And yeah, we look forward to engaging with you all more on this, on just transition. And I think the most important thing that, yeah, let's continue to organize together, organize ourselves, and that's how we build power and, you know, make sure that a different future is possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Fitri. Very short and clear. Michaela, do you want to say something to close?
That's so wonderfully said, Fitri. I just say I agree and thank everyone for joining and being part of this common process.
Yes, thank you, Michaela. Zidane? Yeah.
Terima kasih teman-teman.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the inputs. Very interesting comments that we've heard from everyone on just transition. I hope that we can continue our communications. We hope to hear your inputs, your comments. Thank you so much. Thank you, Zidane.
I will speak and close the webinar in English. Thank you again, everyone, for taking your time and hearing our presentations and to give and giving some inputs to our paper. Yeah, again, this is only a preliminary perspective. There are lots of things to do. There are many things also to learn. And just one additional information, what we wish in the near future to have is as simple as some kind of training module or learning material, education material for the grassroots workers. That is one of our main objective in organizing the grassroots discussions within this project. So thank you again, everyone. Have a good evening for fellow Indonesians and good afternoon for our friends in the Europe. And for the post event, we will be keeping the live recording of this webinar in the YouTube. So thank you again, and
Terima kasih.
Everyone in a good
kasih.
health.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Isaac.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Thank you.